Good evening.
Good evening.
My name is Rosie Grant, and I'm the Executive Director of Patterson Education Fund. And I would like to welcome you to our community forum on the Parent Guide to the PARCC Score Report. Thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to be here tonight, and to our viewing audience, because we are live streaming for the first time today. Thank you also for taking time to watch the program. We know that kids took the PARCC exams for the first time this year, and the first round of reports will come out in about a month or so. And having looked at the guide, I know that we need this forum to help us understand what the results are telling us as parents. So with us this evening is Barry Erickson, Assistant Commissioner of Education, and she's here to walk us through understanding the PARCC report card. As we get started, I would like to thank our co-sponsors, the Parent Education Organizing Committee, Patterson Public Schools, and the Patterson Public Schools PTO Association. So please help me welcome Barry. One other thing I should mention to the folks watching at home is that copies of this or similar documents can be found at understandthescore.org. Thank you very much. I'm happy to follow this. So we'll see how we do.
Find some balance, which is obviously like the secret of life, right? So thank you very much for coming out, and thank you for watching this out in the cyber world. One of the most important things and one of the commitments that we made with the transition to PARCC was to provide useful information to parents in a way that New Jersey hasn't previously. So in the past, our NJASC and HESPA reports for parents were difficult to understand. They were cumbersome. They had edu-speak, if you will. They talked about things like clusters and then didn't define what that was and what it meant. And it never led families to the next step of, what do I do now? And how can I help my child, right? And how can I engage with teachers and administrators and support staff in getting appropriate resources for my children? So we made the commitment early on that we were going to have a score report for families that was meaningful and that led them to next steps. Now, keeping in mind that the next step is going to talk to the teacher, right? Getting engaged, forming that relationship back in the school, and talking about how to support the child sort of writ large, right? This is not about propping up a tutoring industry or anything like that. This is about connecting families more deeply with their schools around meaningful conversations of student outcomes. By the way, I spend a lot of time talking to educators and leaders, and so if I start into my jargon words and I don't make sense, will someone...
I'll raise my hand.
Rosie's going to promise to call me out and make sure that I get to real people language, because sometimes when you spend as much time talking to other folks like I do, you can get kind of caught in that. So I'm going to start by showing a video. It's at understandthescore.org, so if you're at home and you would navigate toward that. But I'm going to start by showing a video that we developed to talk to families about the score reports and about the transition to PARCC. So I'm going to step over here. So this is the website. Escape. All right, hold on.
Scored on the new state. Soon you're going to receive reports showing how your child scored on the new state test in English, language arts, and mathematics. The results for your child and your school will probably look different than previous state tests because the tests are different. For some more rigorous and aligned to new learning standards your state developed to better prepare your child and all students for the next grade and success after school, in college, and careers.
In addition to addressing fundamental skills and concepts, the test includes questions that evaluate vital skills your child is developing, like critical thinking, problem solving, and analytical writing, all important to your child's future success.
Students can show their thinking and the steps they take to solve problems, which provides more detailed information to inform instruction.
When you look at your child's score report, the first item you'll see is your child's overall performance on the English Language Arts or math test. There is a separate report for each subject. Your child's overall performance is reported two ways, a performance level score and a numerical score. You'll notice the scores are grouped into 5 performance levels. Educators have established these levels to mark the extent to which your child has acquired the knowledge and skills students are expected to learn in each grade. On the graphic, you will see where your child's score falls within this range. You and your child's teachers and school can use this information to make decisions about how to support your child and enhance instruction. If your child scores at level 1, 2, or 3, it means he or she has areas to focus on to strengthen his or her skills and to be better prepared for the next steps in their education. This first year, many students may score in this range as they become more familiar with the new standards and assessments. Students who achieve level 4 or 5 on the assessments demonstrate a stronger understanding of the grade level material and are well positioned for continued success in the next grade and toward college and career readiness by graduation.
Compared to many previous state tests, scores may seem lower, but that's not because your child is learning less or falling behind. It's because he or she is being tested on new material that has been identified by educators, college faculty, and business leaders as essential for success in school.
In this first year of the new assessment, we're setting a new baseline. Student performance will improve in time as schools align instruction to the new standards and use information from these tests and other sources to meet your child's individual needs.
Below the overall performance section, you'll notice more detailed information about your child's performance on subject-specific skills identified by your state standards. These scores show how your child is learning these skills compared to students who are meeting grade level expectations in that area.
In this example, you will see information on reading and writing for the English Language Arts Literacy Assessment. The assessment has questions designed to evaluate specific reading skills, like comprehension of fiction and nonfiction texts and vocabulary. Other questions evaluate writing skills, like organizing and developing a summary of reading material. This more detailed information is new and different than previous tests. It is meant to help you and your child's teacher better understand your child's strengths and weaknesses so you can be partners in helping him or her thrive.
Getting results from PARCC and getting these scores from PARCC allows me to be able to make sure that I address the needs of my students more appropriately and more effectively.
You might be asking, well, what can I do now?
First, talk to the teacher. The teacher will have a ton of information, will give parents ideas of ways to help their student if they're falling a little bit behind, or ways to continue to grow a particular skill.
If you find that they're struggling with math, I would engage them in everyday real-world applications as it pertains to math, with the measuring in the kitchen or with some of the household finances.
There are also many resources for parents online, like bealearninghero.org or the National PTA. Please also visit understandthescore.org for additional information about the score report and for links to your state education department website.
Please remember that the success of your child and all students is the ultimate goal of the new standards and assessments. We have every confidence that all students can succeed in school and graduate prepared for college and careers. All right. So, back. All right, let me take the mic out because I'm not that sure. So, back to testing. Back to Understand the Score. So understandthescore.org is where this video is. We did create it so that it would speak to the vast majority of families. The score reports that we send home will have the link on it so that families who get the score reports can immediately go and take a look at the video. But I want to spend some time, if I could, with you walking through the score reports so that you feel really confident. So if you came in late, there's some handouts over on the table of the parent guide to the score report. So turning to this,
Again, this is something that can go home to the families, but is also on our website. And it takes us through the score reports. The top page of your 3-page handout is the parent guide. And then the next two, there's a mock-up of language arts and a mock-up of mathematics. So as we talked about in the video, right, you can see your child's score. Students scored in level 3. Child's in level 3 and earned this score. And this is new to New Jersey, where we actually will put the school average and the district average and the state average and the PARCC average for language arts for the grade level. Okay, so this is a new thing. Parents have wanted to be able to understand their students' performance next to their child's classmates, next to the other kids in the school building. And so by being able to say, your child scored a 739, the school average was a 741, it helps parents contextualize data and sort of understand their students' performance more deeply, right? A lot of us grew up taking that Iowa test of basic skills, and you got the little percentile, right? You're in the 99th percentile, the 98th percentile. But with our move to standards-based assessments in the early 2000s, right, making that kind of comparison on the type of test that we designed is not appropriate. So being able to put your students' data together in this way becomes the way of contextualizing it. Okay, so that was the first page of the parent guide. If you'll turn to the second page, and I don't think I have a slide of the second page, you'll see the mock-up for the reading and writing outcomes. So the PARCC scale, right, let's take a step backwards. The NJS scale was a score between 100 and 300. The PARCC scale is between 650 and 850, right? And then the reading and writing scales are between 10 and 90. So the idea is you don't take your reading and writing score and add them together and think that you're getting to your overall language arts score. These are called subscales. So this particular student got a reading score of 44. Everybody see that? I like it when you nod. Good. I can't give up the classroom teacher in me. I like it when you nod. Okay, so the student score was 44. And the average of students just meeting the expectations for reading, the average of those students is a 50. The school average in reading is a 52. The district average is a 48, and the state average is a 45. So we would say that this student is performing below expectations in reading, but is close to the state average, right, of a 45, but beneath both the district and the school average, right? Now, I just made like 3 sentences there where we linked together, and already we have a better understanding of this child's performance, right? Not yet meeting grade level expectations in reading, but performing close to the state average, but under both the school and the district. In writing, the student's score is 30. The average of students meeting grade level expectations in writing is a 35. The state average is a 30. The school average is a 39. The district average is a 35. So this student, again, is performing not at grade level expectations in writing, but near the state average, but underneath both the district and the school. Okay, so those are some big, and those are not meant to be the last question that we ask about the data, right? Those are starting points for the data. Now, if you dig in deeper, right, in the next section, which has the number 5 by it, these are what we call in the standards the subclaims. So in language arts, we have learning expectations for students that are specific to fiction, right? That are specific to nonfiction. We have expectations that when students write, they will organize their thoughts, that they'll use standard English, right? And appropriately complex vocabulary, right? That students actually incorporate increasingly complex vocabulary as they grow older. And so what you see in this area are those 5 subparts of our learning aspirations for students. In literary text, students met the expectations by showing that they can read and analyze grade-appropriate fiction, drama, and poetry. Right? In informational texts, students meet expectations by showing that they can read and analyze grade-appropriate nonfiction, including texts about history, science, art, and music. Vocabulary, students meet expectations by showing they can use context to determine what words and phrases mean in grade-appropriate texts. Writing expression, students meet expectations by showing they can compose well-developed, organized, and clear writing using details from what they read. Maybe you've heard the language close reading and writing to texts, that's a really important part of what we're trying to do with our implementation of the standards, and this is one of those measures of it. Knowledge and use of language conventions, students meet expectations by showing they can compose writing using the rules of standard English, including those for grammar, spelling, and usage. Okay, so those are the areas that are part of our language arts standards. That's what we're trying to teach students to do across our grade levels. And in this example, the student has a down arrow next to literary text because the student is below expectations in analyzing fiction. In informational text, the student is nearly meeting those standards in informational texts. That's the arrows left and right. In vocabulary, the student is meeting expectations, for meeting or exceeding expectations rather, for vocabulary. In writing expression rather, below expectations. In knowledge and use of language conventions, meeting or exceeding. So a parent could, in fact, very simply look for the areas in which the student is below expectations, right? Go to the Understand the Score web link at the bottom, be taken into a space which describes what we mean when we talk about writing expression, because although that may make sense to those of us in the room, it may not for everyone. So go to the website, find out what we mean when we talk about writing expressions, and here are links with examples of what kinds of things students do and things that families can do to support the student in the areas that they're below expectations. Does that make sense? All right, so let's walk through, right, we walked through the first page of the grade 6 mock-up. That's what you saw in the parent guide. But if you'll turn now at the back of the second page of your handout, this is the actual text that'll be part of the student score report that the district will mail home to families, right? And you can see some explanation to families. What do the performance levels mean? Level 1 means did not yet meet expectations. Level 2, partially met expectations. 3, approached expectations. 4, met expectations. 5, exceeded expectations. So a student who scores in levels 4 and 5, as the video showed you, we're saying is meeting grade level expectations. Or if we're talking about it in the course assessment in the high school, is meeting the expectations of Algebra 1, is meeting the expectations of Algebra 2, is meeting the expectations of geometry. Then there's some information about why they look different. Now again, from NJASC to PARCC, we have an entirely different scale. As I mentioned, we were 100 to 300, and now we're going to be 650 to 950. So a student who scored 215 on NJASC, you can't just go over there and say that was a 400-point gain, right? Because the change in the scale. So that's one of the reasons why we're being very careful in talking about it as a baseline, right? So in New Jersey, because of our scale, if you compare a student's score, they all will look like they went up because we literally moved the scale 400 points upwards, just the numbers. So be careful about trying to draw conclusions from NJASC to PARCC, or from HESPA to PARCC. All right, so look at the math report just real quick. So this is the mathematics, it's a mock-up of the 4th grade report. This student scored a 732. That puts them in the level 3. This student is approaching grade level expectations for 4th grade math. Right? The school average is 761, district average 759, state average 758, PARCC average 747. So the student is approaching the PARCC average, but performing below the state, the district, and the school average. Then, again, the content areas of the math standards. This student is nearly meeting the expectations in the major content. Students would meet the expectations by solving problems including addition, subtraction, multiplication and division, place value, fraction comparisons, and addition and subtraction of fractions with same denominators. Okay? I can't tell you like how long it took us to come to language like that tries to summarize the entirety of 4th grade math in a particular sentence. But we wanted to make sure parents knew what it was that their children were being asked to do in various grade levels. This student is below expectations in the additional and supporting content of 4th grade math. Right? Student meets these expectations and by solving problems involving number and shape patterns, simple measurement conversions, angle measurements, geometric shapes, classifications, and representations of data. Okay, so again, parents can go understand the score and unpack what all of those various things mean. And then there are specific videos that actually explain the standards in different grade levels. Expressing mathematical reasoning, right? So one of the things that in New Jersey we've been doing for a long period of time is having students show their work, right? So our NJASC test in math has asked students to write. Show your work, write your thinking out, let us understand what your reasoning is. There are still 18 states that have bubble-only multiple choice tests in math, where it really is about selecting the right answer. So this part about mathematical reasoning, this student in particular is meeting or exceeding. Everybody see the up arrow? Again, I love it when you nod. All right, everyone's next still working. Meeting expectations by creating and justifying logical mathematical solutions and analyzing and correcting the reasoning of others. Right, so how is this math problem set up appropriately or not? In modeling and application, students meet expectations by solving real-world problems, representing and solving problems with symbols, reasoning quantitatively and strategically using appropriate tools. That's not as in clear English as I had hoped it to be, because the word quantitatively is obviously going to be difficult. But the idea is that part of what we've done with PARCC, with the assessment, is to drive home the solving of real problems. Problems that are of interest to children, that have meaning in the world, that ultimately aren't something that's crazy abstract and that students don't engage in, right? Because we know that the kinds of instruction that we're trying to emulate and support involves teachers teaching real-world application, right? Digging in and teaching those kinds of real-world applications. All right, so to help support even more, we have created a webinar for principals that talk about the performance reports. I'm sorry, the individual student reports. It is here, right? I did this with Emil Carafa, who was a principal of the Washington Elementary School down south, where we talked about what principals should expect in the 2016 administration of the PARCC. And then Emil talked about how he plans on using the score reports with his faculty and with his parents. One of the things, obviously, having the video there, principals can show the video as part of faculty meetings. We've developed an FAQ for teachers to use and having conversations with families.
FAQ.
FAQ, frequently asked question. I love it. All right. Then I just wanted to call out that this guide itself that I just handed you is right here on this link, Understand the Score. You can download the guide. The next steps for families, you go to Understand the Score. Where is my child doing well? What does she need additional support? How can I help? That drives families into the resources, and then takes you over to Be a Learning Hero, learning tools, visit the website. So helpful tools to be used at home in supporting English language arts and math, other links to great resources for families to follow up with. And there ends my overall presentation, and I'm happy to take your questions. Yes, Dr. Hodges. Uh-oh. You're misbehaving, Dr. Hodges.
This is the first page. School average, district average, state average, and you have PARCC average.
Yep.
What would be the difference between the state and the PARCC average?
So the state would just, so we're looking at, let's make the grade 6 language arts test. Okay, that's the mock-up. So the state average would be the average of all 6th grade students in the state who took PARCC. The PARCC average is the average of all 6th graders across all the PARCC states that took the 6th grade language arts test. So again, like part of the commitment of PARCC was to have a comparable test score so that we would be able to benchmark ourselves with our sister state in Massachusetts, with Rhode Island, with Maryland, right? And we'd ultimately be able to draw some comparisons about how our children are doing nationwide.
Just a follow-up. How many states are still?
I think we're at 10, and that probably includes the District of Columbia.
Barry, why are the score scales so different? We're so used to getting percentages of how kids do our tests.
So we will, Rosie, give out the percentage of students who are performing in level 1, the percent of kids who are performing level 2, 3, 4, 5, all of the various performance levels in the way that we did in the past. This is the percent of kids who are partially proficient, proficient, and advanced proficient. And in the past, we would take the proficient plus the advanced proficient buckets, if you will, and that's a technical term, bucket, and we would bring those scores together and say, this is the scores, this is the percentage of kids who were proficient this year in that test program. Under PARCC, we'll put out all the data in the 5 areas, and we won't use the word proficient. We'll talk about the percentage of kids who are meeting or exceeding the expectations of the grade level, or the content if it's a high school end of course assessment. We got some really loud, very clear feedback from families that they don't like our language, right? This notion of proficiency that doesn't resonate with families, right? Talking about meeting a strong command of the standard may resonate with educators, but families ultimately have sort of one question. Is my child meeting the expectations of the grade level? Are they on grade level? Right? And that's ultimately what families have been engaged in wanting to understand. And so we worked very hard with families and the National PTA and focus groups and coming together and talking about the names of these levels. Would they communicate what it is that we wanted them to understand? So meeting expectations and exceeding expectations means that your child is on grade level. And if you're on grade level each year, you're on track to be ready for college and career, right? You're on track to graduate from high school being ready for college and career. That's what it means to have aligned student expectations in an aligned assessment system.
Thank you. Other questions?
Me?
There you go. Ms. Johnson, thank you.
Good evening.
Good evening.
In the past, we gauged success on state assessments with regard to the just proficient mean. That just proficient mean was the impetus for the appeal process. You know what I'm talking about. The students had to, if they fell short in a certain cluster, then they had to take that cluster when they did not meet the JPM.
Yep.
What is now going to be the process for if a student fell short? What's the, I guess what I'm trying to say is, what are we appealing?
Right.
I'm not sure about that at all.
Right. So she's talking about meeting the graduation requirements, right? So in the high school, there was a testing requirement that the students met and demonstrated mastery of competencies. So in New Jersey, we have a 1979 law which says that a student needs to demonstrate competencies on a statewide assessment in reading, writing, and if you will, computation. I love the language from the late 70s. So since the just proficient means aren't there, we've developed an entirely new process for the portfolio appeals. It was messaged to the districts last week.
We got it.
Yep, and so you should follow the guidance from that. It will not be keyed off of the test data, right? It's keyed off of standards. So you'll need to read that, and by all means, reach out to Jeff Hogger and others to put together a trial portfolio, and then we'll take a look at it. But it's not, you're absolutely right, it doesn't key off the just proficient means. Just proficient means, by the way, a kid who scored at the 200 mark, which is the proficiency mark inside our old assessment system, how did they do in various clusters? Right, that's what it means to have a just proficient mean. And since the clusters were sampled standards year to year, they often were not particularly meaningful for student competencies. So ultimately, there's new guidance in the portfolio appeal process about what students should be demonstrating to meet the standards.
I'm sitting here and I'm listening, and my question is this, because this comes from so many teachers. This test is on a 6th grade level or 4th grade level, correct?
So the tests themselves are in grade level, in each grade level, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, right, and language arts and in math.
Okay.
So I just gave you mock-ups for 2 of the programs.
Right. Question that I'm having, or that most teachers are concerned with, is the hand that they're dealt.
Mm-hmm.
When they get a student population that might be predominantly bilingual, or there might be other deficiencies, and these children are expected to take this test on grade level, and they're not there.
Mm-hmm.
What accommodations are made to address that issue?
So students who are part of specific programs like the English language learners, right, or special education students, there are specific accommodations that are part of the test in and of itself. So in special education, for instance, the test platform could be set up for students to have different portions of the test read aloud, right? You could do large font, there's even a Braille version of the test. So those types of accommodations are specific to students and are specified by the IEP team, the child study team. In English language learners, for instance, the federal law allows us to exempt English language learners from taking the PARCC assessment in their first year in New Jersey schools because they would be taking the English language acquisition test called Access for ELS. So we were able to exempt the children in grades 3 to 8 from taking PARCC because they were taking the English language acquisition test. But the mandate to test on grade level is part of federal law. So we don't have the option to say this student is starting 4th grade on grade level 2, therefore we're going to give him or her the grade level 2 test. PARCC is designed to have both have questions that are both at the lower end of the performance and the higher end of the performance scale so that we're able to give back meaningful data. But a student would not obviously be meeting grade level expectations if they were not performing at the grade level at the end of the year.
You pretty much covered that.
Oh, good, awesome.
Other questions? I have to say that speaks to why we need systemic change to make sure that all children are performing on grade level in all grades.
Yep.
Hi, Barry. Will the literary tags, informational text, will those breakdowns be the same for every grade level in language arts
So-
and for math?
Yes, so the language arts text, let me get all the words out appropriately enunciated. The language arts text on the student score reports is fairly consistent across all the grade levels because those subclaims and the standards are fairly consistent across all of English language arts. The text on the math student score reports changes because what's being taught in the math grade levels obviously varies. Like, we're not talking about adding fractions in 7th grade, right? So the text in that's explanatory as part of the math student score reports will be specific to the grade level standards that are in math.
But the categories will stay the same, so it would be...
The mathematical reasoning, as you'll see, those are what we talk about as being sort of the shifts,
So
right? The category headings will be the same across the ISRs, but the actual text underneath them will vary based on the content of the specific standards.
We're not to consider those as clusters at all?
We call them categories, right, versus clusters. Yep.
Thank you.
Are there still going to be strands which point more directly to areas of success and or difficulty that the teachers can focus in on?
Yes. So I didn't prepare it for this conversation because it kind of moves into a level of detail that is that's pretty dense. But again, one of the things that is new about PARCC is that we'll be able to release the test questions, right? And when I say this to people that I come across in the real world, I say, New Jersey's never shown a teacher the test in the past. Like, teachers weren't allowed to look at NJ Ask or look at the HESPA test because we reuse the test questions from year to year. Developing test questions is a very costly, expensive thing, right? Not only from our perspective of adults, but because you have to field test each test item you create, which means the time that students test is actually longer because you're field testing test questions, right? So releasing a test and saying, dear teacher, this is how we assess whether or not your students have learned, right? It seems like a no-brainer, but it's something that in the history of New Jersey assessments, we've never done, right? So it's a black box. So as a tool to help teachers, NJ Ask and HESPA just didn't do it, right? In PARCC, October 23rd, we're releasing a full version of the tests in each grade level and in each subject area. So we will put out there a full-length test. Now, it's not, there are lots of different versions of the test, like A, B, C, or D, right? And it's not A. It's a compilation. We're taking test questions off all the forms and essentially creating a new version of the test that we're releasing publicly. Teachers, well, administrators first, can have access to how Manuel did on test question number 1. Manuel got 5 of 5 possible points on test question number 1. Hannah got 3 of the 5 possible points. So at a standards level, because you can see item number 1 was measuring this standard. Could a student multiply one-digit whole numbers? At a standard level, teachers will be able to look at it, administrators will be able to look at it and say, we did really well on the test questions that were aligned to this standard, and not so well on test questions that were on this standard. It's called item analysis, right? This is something that our teachers have been asking for forever, right? Can we do item analysis so that we can pinpoint strengths and weaknesses in curriculum and instruction? So that's something that, that folks will be able to do. But just the October 23rd, just releasing the test is enormous, right? We will put up graded student work. So this is an example of student writing. It is graded on the rubric, and there are annotations from the scorers about why this question got full credit. Oops. Why the student got full credit, where the student needs to improve, all of those various things. So just the conversations of teachers changes when you bring graded student work to the table. Many teachers, myself included, I taught years ago in in Plainfield. I'm standing in Patterson, but I taught in Plainfield. When you look at a test question, for many folks, that becomes the moment that the standard is clear. Right? Oh, I get it. I see what they're asking my students to do when they talk about writing to texts. Right? And so this is a way of informing that conversation even more fully.
I have a question. Is this
Releasing the test?
doing that?
Yeah, absolutely. Every year. Every year. But, and by the way, it's something that we can do because we're part of a consortium, because we're pooling our resources, because we have, we had 5 million students take a PARCC assessment last year across the country. And because of that number, every child doesn't have to field test a new item, right? Because you don't need every kid to take every field tested item. You just need a handful, relatively speaking, a handful of students taking particular items. So we can release the test questions in part because we're able to be more efficient in our field testing.
Good evening.
Good evening.
On the legend,
Yes.
where it says below expectations, nearly meets expectations, and meets or exceeds expectations.
Yes, ma'am.
So this year, we'll get the first set of results. Then they'll take the test again. And as a teacher speaking with a parent, and they see that for the second year in a row, they still are below expectations. I don't really like the wording.
Yeah.
Okay, so, as a parent now, there's concerns. And of course, if I'm teaching a specific grade and they're 2 or 3, I know that they're 2 or 3 levels below reading at this point. It's difficult to catch up at this point.
Yeah.
Okay. So how, as a teacher, do you try to help guide a parent at that point that's feeling a little dejected or whatever, trying to figure out what do I do for my child at this point? Okay.
Very good question. So in the student score reports in 2016, so not year 1, but next year when the student score reports come out, we'll be able to calculate and place on the student score reports the student's growth. So internally, that's SGP, right? We call it SGP. We'll be able to put the student's growth on their score reports. So for families whose students are not meeting expectations, right? Having a growth score, knowing that your child's on a trajectory towards meeting expectations becomes a really important message. Same thing is true of schools, by the way, which is the reason why we put the SGPs on the school performance reports, so that we could talk about schools that were on trajectories towards becoming proficient, but not yet there, right? So the student SGPs compared to New Jersey and then compared to the PARCC Consortium will be part of next year's student score reports. But I agree with you, right? Without a doubt, there's a tension here between being absolutely forthcoming and transparent with families about where their students are in terms of meeting grade level expectations, right? There's an absolute importance there that I acknowledge and I accept as an important responsibility in the work that I do. But at the same time, being able to be helpful and motivating and ultimately helping to drive the conversation about how we increase all student learning is also an important task. And so that's the reason why I've always been particularly excited about measures of growth. And it can't just be I got a 700 and now I got a 702, right? So that's not necessarily appropriate as a growth measure, but the student growth percentile methodology helps further that conversation.
Thank you.
I'm going to ask another question that pertains to the portfolio process for high school students, and it's kind of a follow-up to what my colleague, Dr. Johnson, asked, but I'm going to ask it a different way. I'm trying to reconcile what was in the information that was provided online about the portfolio process with this information right here. And I just want to make sure that I'm understanding correctly. Correct me if I'm wrong. Am I to understand that it is only I'm going to use language arts as an example, that only the total score in reading and writing is what determines that students need to do the portfolio process and do it in its entirety as the handout seems to suggest? Or should I look at this handout that you gave today and, for example, it differentiates between reading literary text, and in this example it was below level, and informational text was on par, and so on and so on. So, for the portfolio process, do they all do the same things, which is what the handout seems to suggest?
That's my point.
Or do they, as per this example, they would do only the literary text because that's below, but the informational text was on par? So I hope you were following me.
I did.
Understand that?
And it's about the top level scale score.
Okay.
It's not even about the writing or the reading subscale. So if the student's not meeting the top level language arts scale score, then the whole portfolio process applies,
Okay.
right?
So it's not according to clusters then?
Not according to clusters. So the PARCC data, it's not like the funnel that we had with HESPA, ASA, and now the appeal process, right, which was keyed off of the clusters. It's just proficient means keyed off the clusters. It's not that. It is a more inclusive portfolio process for families, for students that are not meeting one of the 9 other ways. PARCC or SAT or ACT or ACT Aspire or the PSAT or the ASVAB or the AccuPlacer. For students who are not meeting one of those thresholds, the portfolio appeal. Now the portfolio appeal, we've designed it very specifically to make sure that we haven't raised expectations for the class of 2016 versus the class of 2015. So that's one of the reasons why the PARCC data doesn't funnel to the portfolio, because if a student took an Algebra 2 PARCC assessment, we're not asking you for an Algebra 2 portfolio, because that would be much higher than where HESPA ever was in terms of competencies. So we're asking for a portfolio that is around a HESPA moment, right? That ultimately is not raising expectations, making it more difficult for the class of 2016 to get a diploma compared to the class of 2015. But since the students were in 11th grade last year taking 11th grade content, that's way beyond where HESPA ever was, which is one of the reasons why you can't use the ELA 11 score report to say this is what the portfolio has to be. Now, at the same time, we're also working really hard to communicate to teachers the kinds of things that are different in the standards and the instructional shifts in the close reading of texts, and close reading and the writing to text and all of that. So we want to see that kind of work in the student portfolios as well. So it's a different kind of process, and I'm sorry that I wasn't clear earlier on that.
One last quick question, I think is the last one. Will the ISRs be released in any other languages, and if so, which ones?
Oh gosh, that's a really interesting. So I don't.
What's in her ISR?
Oh, individual school report.
The individual student report.
The parent guide.
The parent. I think that those are translated, but obviously not a student-specific one, right? So we don't have the capacity to know that family should be mailed home a Spanish version. But I don't have the answer to your question of which languages. But I will work on that. And what we're doing at the department, just so you know, we're going to help write the cover letters that districts can use when they send home the student score reports. So we'll write sort of the middle paragraphs, and then you can personalize it with the beginning and the end. And I'll make sure, thank you for your prompt, I'll make sure that I highlight those kinds of resources that are available to families in other languages.
So we've given Barry some homework.
I love homework.
I want to thank you, Barry, for coming out and being with us
Thank you
here
very
in
much.
Patterson this evening. And I want to acknowledge and thank our parents that joined us this evening. We know it's almost bedtime for their children, and for you at home who watched along. I do also want to acknowledge that we were joined by 2 school board members, Dr. Hodges and Mr. Aaron Carr. And we were joined by the superintendent, the deputy superintendent, and several administrators, including principals of the schools and some teachers. So thank you all for joining us, for asking some great questions, for giving Barry some homework, and she'll get back to us around translating. And I hope that this has provided you with the information that you need around understanding the PARCC. I do want to remind you that the PARCC is one assessment. It's one way of telling how your kids are doing. There are many other ways that were referred to here tonight. And most of all, talk to your kids. Check their homework. Ask for a copy of their curriculum. Develop a relationship with your teachers and your principals. So thanks again. And